So last week I shared that I would be joining the Wiki Loves Pride event this year. It's just a way for a lot of Wikipedia editors to try to work on queer articles together. And it is a competition. There are some prizes. I was not intending to compete in any real way. I just wanted to try to make some articles on the same subject as a lot of other people were at the same time, which is not something I've experienced before. Normally when I dive into an area and try to make a couple different articles under one topic, other people aren't necessarily working on that topic at the exact same time that I am, and so it's not as social as this event promised to be. So I was pretty excited to learn from other people, and I've already seen that some of the articles I've worked on previously in queer literature are getting expanded because of people in this event, which is awesome to see. It's not very common that people are really jumping into an article and making it longer. So today I wanted to walk you through the first article I attempted to expand for the competition, and spoiler alert, it didn't even count for the competition, but I had a lot of fun doing it, and now I feel ready today to actually write an article under the real rules. So the competition actually has a lot of suggested articles, and they're great starting off points, but I usually prefer looking at pages that are already out there, usually overview pages on a topic, because all of these overview articles are where people start out when they're reading about queer people in the US, and then they want to know more, and then they click on a link in that page. But what happens if there's not a link there? And so I think it's really nice to be able to fill out, starting from the top down, new articles, as well as starting from the bottom up. And so when I was looking for new articles, I started glancing around at the Queer People in Canada page, and already in the second paragraph, I'm seeing a mention to Mount Royal Park, and this is a place that I visited in Montreal, and I had no idea it had this queer history attached to it, and I'm looking at the Mount Royal page, and it's not mentioned in that page either, which is a shame, because you shouldn't just have to go to a queer history article to find queer history. It should also be in the history of attached places. So I'm starting to Google, look around for news articles on the topic. I eventually pull up Google Scholar to look for academic papers to see if there's anything more in depth. And I eventually find a couple different papers that are cool, a museum that has a history of the subject, and a pretty interesting recent news story about how the trees in the park have been affected by invasive species, and this can be traced back to clear-cutting that happened in reaction to a lot of public backlash to the park's uses, which included cruising. So if you're interested in any of these articles, I'll link them in the description. And in the rest of this video, I just wanted to show how I went about expanding the article. I basically looked through the article to see if anything had been mentioned, and it wasn't, but I went to the history section and found the period where this would have covered. So there was already a mention of the 1910s, there's some mention of the 1970s, and right in between that, I'll talk about the 1950s and the history of the morality cuts and cruising use of the park. So I start glancing back and forth between the sources I found, sometimes finding new sources if there's like a gap in the summary that I want to make and I want to find a source that refers to that period of history or like somebody's motivations for doing something. And I just go back and forth between looking at those sources and trying to summarize them in my own words and not trying to add too much of my own interpretation to anything, but trying to balance out the historical interpretation that different scholars and different authors have come up with. And you'll see that I actually revised this a few different times, partially because I'm not really confident in my writing style, partially also because I'm trying to summarize some really long articles, and I want to make sure that my summaries don't accidentally imply something different than what the authors imply, or summarize something so much that it becomes unclear. And it definitely takes me a couple different tries to get to a summary that I'm happy with. This doesn't mean that it's perfect. I've definitely had to push back against perfectionism here. But the nice thing about Wikipedia is that somebody else can come along and improve the article further. Once I feel that the article is in a fine enough point to stop, I add all of the sources that I've used, making sure that each sentence is backed up by the sources that apply to it. Or if a few different sentences are using the same source, then I'll have the correct source at the end of that block of text. And it's sometimes really easy to add a source. You just type in the URL of the paper that you looked at and everything will be filled out for you. And other times you actually have to enter stuff manually because it wasn't able to be grabbed correctly. But it doesn't take too long. My final addition was to add some subheadings because the history section was starting to get kind of long and I wanted to kind of capture the different periods by themes so that people knew which key events that they could read a bit more about if they were quickly scanning the page. And finally, I wanted to tie some modern events back to the morality cuts of the 50s because that was in a recent news article and I thought that was really interesting as well. I've also added some links to different Wikipedia pages for major related topics because when I'm reading the encyclopedia, I like to be able to click to related pages and learn more. And with that, I feel like the article is pretty much complete. And so I click publish changes and I summarize what I did and then press publish. And unfortunately, when I'm asked if I want to associate this edit with the event I'm doing, I say no thanks because it doesn't actually meet the requirements. So unfortunately, it's June 8th, 8 days in, and I have no articles to my name under this event. But I promise I will be working more on them, and I'm, in fact, planning on making one today. Also, this means that if you want to compete alongside me, you can easily come out ahead. So if you wanted to get started anytime soon, I would love to see what articles that you've decided to work on. And I certainly think that there's no time that's too late to sign up for this event, because even if you sign up on the last day, you can still get some changes in that you are happy with. So whether you work on any queer-themed edits like me that don't actually apply to the event, or you decide that you want to go for a win and start pumping out new articles, I would love to hear if you have any questions or hear about the drama and stories you come up with as you're making these page changes. Thanks for listening, and happy Pride!